seems to me inconceivable that Christ, who obviously was a great preacher, did not crack the odd joke from time to time. I mean, all great public speakers know how to do that, you know. I mean, I've often thought that somewhere buried in the gospel there might be some one-liners.
Satirist Tony Hendra, today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. There's a growing movement of Christian nationalism in the U.S., and an equally fast-growing opposition to that movement. So what would a Christian theocracy actually look like? Well, leave it to the renowned satirist Tony Hendra to fill in some of the blanks. I mean, who better to do so than one of the original editors of the National Lampoon? In 2005, Tony Hendra wrote a satire called The Messiah of Morris Avenue, in which he imagined a not-too-distant future in which Jesus returned, but not looking or acting anything like what the Christian nationalists of today think he will look and act like. And what would happen in that case? And what would he make of the Christian theocracy that had evolved by then? Now, even though I did this interview with Tony Hendra almost 20 years ago, see if you don't think that this still sounds so relevant and so spot on target to what we see around us today. And keep in mind, this is satire. So, in just a moment, my conversation with Tony Hendra.
Come back with us now as we relive a little piece of our cultural history on Now I've Heard Everything. This interview is from Bill Thompson's 30-year archive. Enjoy.
So here now, from 2006, Tony Hendra.
You don't suppose people aren't going to take this as nonfiction, I hope, are they?
Well, I must say I've been doing some radio shows in the last few days in which the fact that, this is basically about a putative world of the future where the Christian right has taken over. People have been sort of grilling me about, well, how did you know about Jerry Falwell and John McCain? You know, how did you know Pat Robertson's empire was falling apart because no one needs it anymore? You know, I mean, there was even one guy who said, "So your Messiah is an immigrant, huh?" It all seemed to be, not even prognostication.
But this is the thing that has struck me for many years about great satirists, is that you really do seem to know before anybody else knows where we're going, what's going to happen, what the likely outcome is going to be. I mean, are you prescient? Are you psychic? Or are you just very good at extrapolating?
Well, I think probably the latter, to be literal or to be fair about it. But I mean, I do think satire is one of the jobs of satire, I should say, is telling wonderful lies, what I call super facts, that are actually truer in many ways than any number of facts, in a normal journalistic piece. Although a lot of journalism doesn't have any facts anymore. But you know what I mean. I mean, it's like satire is the big lie that gets you to the truth, and so in that respect, I think probably a great deal of what's in this book is, if not coming true, already in the offing.
How far into the future does the story take place, you imagine?
This is an America of the very near future. I mean, in fact, I see it as about a decade hence. A little more than, George Orwell wrote 1984 and 1944, so he went a little further ahead than that. But it's the same technique. I mean, using the future as a reflection on the present is a great it's a great device.
Well, as your book opens, laws have been passed, society has been shifted, has been steered, has been channeled toward a particular desired outcome, and not always for the better of some of the characters, it sounds like.
Well, certainly not for the narrator of this book, who is a very jaded journalist. And what journalist isn't jaded? Whose name is Johnny Greco, and he is the narrator of what is in effect a kind of spiritual satire, which could be seen in another way as a kind of gospel. A sort of parable, but anyway, he is the world in which he finds himself is a quasi theocracy, in which the fundamentalist right has really achieved many of its fondest dreams. So the city we're sitting in, for example, is now Washington. The D.C. in its title is now Dominion of Christ, not District of Columbia, which is actually a fundamentalist right proposal. That they want to call it the Dominion of Christ. There's the Supreme Court is now called the Supreme Court under God. And it was first christened that by a man who is, in effect, the Secretary of Salvation, who sits on the cabinet alongside the Secretary of Defense. Imagine a world. It's not that out of the realm of possibility. I mean, 20 years ago, we didn't imagine that the Christian right would have anything like the success it's had. I mean, imagine a world in which, I don't know, let's be a little more facetious, that, the Justice Department closes down American Idol for idolatry. Imagine a world in which this is another real proposal of the Christian right. They want federal statutes against blasphemy, sodomy, and witchcraft, and they mean it. There was a big convention of the National Religious Broadcasters Association, of which I know you're a member, and one of the serious things that was debated there was getting these federal statutes passed. I mean, imagine what would happen to Harry Potter if witchcraft was illegal, or bewitched.
Or bewitched, yes. It strikes me that this is, again, the difficulty of especially satire in the early 21st century, as we now know. What's really happening is almost a living satire. I mean, how do you satirize that without going so far over the top it becomes a cartoon?
Well, it's very hard for satirists now to keep up with reality, I must say, to keep up with the politicians. I mean, one kind of really disturbing example is that there was someone. I blog occasionally on the Huffington Post, and there was a post the other day. I can't remember who by, but it was essentially saying something that I know already, which is that a great deal of our Mideastern policy is being driven by the idea that we are in the final days, that Armageddon is at hand, the second coming is at hand, and that this will take place in the Middle East, specifically in Israel, in the plain of Megiddo. And this, I mean, people, these guys actually go to Israel to look at where the final battle is going to take place between Christ and Antichrist. And I do think that once this kind of belief starts conflating with actual policy, this is a point at which one has to actually say, hey, wait a minute. At the very least, we're going to start ridiculing this stuff. Though that's not really the ultimate point of my book, that is one of the reasons that I felt this was the time to write it.
Well, in your book, it's not giving anything away. It's the whole point of the book. Christ comes again.
Right.
But not in the way that perhaps today's fundamentalists, the religious right, have long said he will be coming.
Well, exactly. I mean, into this environment, putatively in the future, but possibly much closer than we think, which is held together by the glue of expectation, if you like, and the day of judgment is at hand, and all Pat Robertson's enemies are going to get it in the neck. Into this environment, which is, of course, is essentially built around a certain conception of the character of Christ, comes a Messiah who may very well be the real Christ, except that he's Latino, he comes from the Bronx, he's poor, he moves amongst the poor, he cares first and foremost for the poor, just like the first time, in my opinion. And things sort of develop from there, as obviously as soon as he comes to the attention of the theocrats, or those in charge of the theocracy, fireworks are bound to take place, and they do.
Beginning with an arrest for healing without a license.
Yes, in Connecticut, of course, where that's currently illegal. You cannot perform miracles in Connecticut without a medical license.
After this short break, Tony Hendra ponders, does Jesus have a sense of humor?
Are you finding this interview engaging? Curious about the book we're discussing?
Simply click the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com, to get your copy.
When you shop through our affiliate links, you're not only enjoying great content, but also supporting this podcast.
Thank you for your support.
Now back to my 2006 interview with Tony Hendra.
My favorite part of that particular chapter is when he gets hauled up in front of the judge, Jose, who everyone calls Jay, who is my sort of lumpy-faced, lovable, charismatic Messiah. He says he takes great exception to the judge arresting him for trying to cure someone of leukemia, someone who in this future, obviously being poor, has no conceivable chance of medical coverage. And he says, I'm going to say something to you that I said once before, and that's this: judge not that ye be not judged. And then he says, I'm only going to say this twice. So he's got a sense of humor too.
And that, it occurred to me, of the many things that may trouble some people of deep faith in this book, that might be one of them, is the idea that, wait a minute, Christ can't have a sense of humor. He can't make a joke.
Yes.
But how dare you?
Yes, humor and holiness do not go together in many people's minds. But I mean, I think it seems to me inconceivable that Christ, who obviously was a great preacher, did not crack the odd joke from time to time. I mean, all great public speakers know how to do that, And I mean, I've often thought that somewhere buried in the sort of sanitized language of the gospel, there might be some one-liners, For example, when Jesus says, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. I mean, if you say that a certain way, it sounds like a one-liner. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. You know what I mean? I mean, you can see how somebody would say that, and the people would fall about.
Well, it's not like he's going around saying, "Peter, pull my finger," or something like that. But but you're right. I mean, obviously, he's. I mean, you can't be a great charismatic charmer without using some humor along the way.
Precisely.
But I'm guessing, if I'm not asking too dangerous a question, do you have religious beliefs yourself? I mean, are you a religious man?
Oh, yes. I mean, I actually spent a great deal of my life not having religious beliefs, but I was, as a kid, I mean, I wrote about this in my last book. As a kid, I was very religious. I wanted to become a Benedictine monk, in fact. And it was only seeing a show called Beyond the Fringe, and which was some of the purest satire, I think, ever performed on stage, that made me change my vocation from monk to satirist. But
has it been that wide a transition? I mean, are those two closer together than people think?
Well, Father Joe, who was my mentor and who I wrote about, actually did once say that he thought that the monk and the satirist had a lot in common. My dear Tony, he said they both see something wrong with the world and they set out to do something about it, which I think is a rather comforting thing. But I mean, at least officially, for many years of my life, I had no spiritual beliefs at all, and in the end, I came back to a certain kind of fragmented, I'd say, Catholicism. I believe some of it, not real fond of the people who tell me what I have to believe. But no, I mean, this book springs out of a real passionate belief that we are being bombarded by people who, A, insist they have a monopoly on not just the truth, but on the character of Christ, and B, an equally burning conviction that that's not at all what he was like, or would be like should he return.
Well, your book is not at all a swipe at Christianity. It's a swipe at the people who have stolen and hijacked Christianity, isn't it?
Very good. I couldn't put it better myself.
Bless my heart.
Yes.
Did you know how the book needed to end? Or I don't give away the ending, but I mean, did you know that's what you were working toward?
Yes. I mean, the book unfolds in a way that will be familiar to Christian and non-Christian alike, and that has a particular resonance at this time of year, what's more. But that doesn't give it away totally. One of the interesting things was that when I first started thinking about this, and I have to add that in my life as a satirist, it's not something I haven't toyed with before. I mean, the idea of Christ returning to expose those in power is a very useful premise. But when I first thought of it, which actually was in the wake of the 2004 elections, in which this was all such a big issue, I must say I thought of it as, well, this will be easy. It's a real simple premise. Christ comes back, he exposes them all, boom, out, the end. But when I realized that I actually had to make this Messiah, this Savior character, convincing, I mean, I couldn't have him spout it's the St. James Bible. He had to be convincing. He had to be now. He had to be one of us. He had to be ordinary. He had to be, and yet he had to have, a sort of, as he says, a refreshed message that was still, Christianity in its essence. And I started, thinking very, very carefully about who this guy was, and even whether he should be a guy. And secondly, what I really did believe. And as a result, the character really, I think, came alive. I mean, people have told me that, when you first encounter this guy, you actually do believe that he might very well be the real thing. And once that happened, the book took a whole different direction. It didn't take a different direction plot-wise, because that was kind of preordained, but it took a very different direction feel-wise. It becomes very serious and very spiritual towards the end. I think for those who did enjoy Father Joe, and there were many of them, thank God, it's no accident that this guy's name is Jose, which of course is the Spanish for Joe. And I think in some ways other interviewers have picked up on this also. It's not an obvious sequel to Father Joe, since obviously Joe having gone to his reward, there aren't any sequels there. Although some idiot publisher actually seriously suggested, how about Father Joe in heaven? I thought, I think I'm leaving this lunch now. But in a sense, even though this is fiction and it's a novel and so forth, it is a sequel to Father Joe.
Tony Hendra died in 2021. He was 79. Now you can get your copy of The Messiah of Morris Avenue by Tony Hendra by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 2005 interview with Wendy Wasserstein.
Well, sloth was the last, actually. Sloth didn't come in until the 17th century, so it actually really was the last. The sin used to be sadness and laziness.
And my 1986 conversation with John Waters.
Some people read the books or see the movies and say, my God, can you imagine if my parents saw this? I think that's part of the appeal. But I'm lucky enough that there's enough people in the world that share my sense of humor that enable me to make a living doing what I want.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, let's go to the videotape. No, not literally, but the guy who invented that phrase, or popularized it anyway. My 2000 interview with sportscaster Warner Wolf.
It was time for the tape to come up, and I gave the normal intro. No tape. 3 times I tried it. No tape. Finally, I said to the director, hey, Ernie, let's go to the videotape. Boom, he rolled it.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.